Welcome back to the Good Growth Podcast, brought to you by BGF, UK and Ireland's most active equity investor. In this conversation, we're joined by Bruce Daisley, a workplace culture expert. Over a 12-year career, Bruce became one of the UK's most recognised technology leaders, first running YouTube UK, then leading Twitter across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. In this episode, we explore three critical components of resilient leadership: the challenges of scaling teams and recruiting effectively, plus what he wishes he'd done differently during Twitter's rapid growth. We also dive into BGF's hybrid work survey, discussing the tension between the flexibility of modern work and the overwhelming stream of communication that comes with it.
Bruce, welcome to the BGF Good Growth Podcast. You were the keynote speaker at the Growth Forum, which is a day where all of BGF's investments and investees come together at the Science Museum. I always think it's a really exciting day because these are some of the fastest growing companies in the United Kingdom and you get a real insight into it all. What were you talking to them about?
Yeah, I was trying to contextualise from the perspective of someone who's worked in startups and scale-ups. I was trying to contextualise some of the discussion we have about resilience. So I was talking specifically about, quite often, the term resilience is so readily used. It's so almost ubiquitous that we don't necessarily take a step back and think about the ingredients of it. So I was interested in reflecting on that, on reflecting on creating some approachable entry points for resilience. I'll give you some context. So let me sort of take a step back first. Well, look, the term resilience, quite often, the moment you start, your spidey senses are attuned to it. You listen to the Today programme, and every hour there'll be two mentions of we need to be more resilient. It's time they were more resilient. Have we got a resilient supply chain? It's used all the time. Very desirable, right? Our ability to bounce back from setbacks. But quite often, when people receive the invocation that they need to be more resilient, they don't know what to do. And there's some really clear examples. The US military is the biggest customer in the world for resilience training. Spent $1 billion trying to train because they had this pretty major issue that people were leaving a great period of high-performing service, and then they were ending up, about 40% of former US service people end up with addiction issues, massive homelessness issues. So you've got this strange thing where it's a high-functioning organisation. You know, it's not like you're sending people out who have failed at what they were doing, and yet they're ending up in a bad situation. So the US military spent $1 billion training that. And what they found was it had no impact. And so we ended up with an interesting challenge where we were doing, they were doing training, they were trying to create it. And it's back to that thing, you know, businesses are talking about the need for resilience, the military's looking for resilience, but what we're finding is that we're not achieving it. So what I did at the forum was say, I wonder if there are some ways that we could rethink this, break this down and try and achieve something that's actually touchable and achievable. Can we do something that's going to do that? So you know, I worked in scale-ups like Twitter. I worked when Twitter went from 400 employees to several thousand employees, but still quite small. Yeah. And so, you know, firsthand, I've seen some of these things and tried to apply them myself.
And what was the sort of process? Because you made it quite informal in terms of people actually working with each other, right? Because that's also the thing with these keynotes sometimes is that people just get up and sort of literally give a lecture. And it's one of those things you talk about, like, everyone wants to have resilience, right? Nobody wants an unresilient workforce. But what were the sort of processes that you made the companies go through on the day?
Yeah, so the three components I think that are critical to resilience are control, identity, and community. And so just to briefly talk about those, control, sort of personal autonomy, is probably the biggest predictor of any sense of well-being. If you ever feel overwhelmed by something, it's normally because there are pretty big boulders in your life that you don't have any control over. So it might be your financial situation's out of your control, or you open your calendar and it's overwhelming, but you've got these client demands coming at you. You know, an absence of control is one of the biggest predictors. Then I talked about the importance of identity, being accepted for who we are, knowing who we are, understanding that plays a really big part in how we appraise ourselves, how others appraise us. But the final part, and I think this is the bit that's most relevant for the forum, is connectedness, community. And quite often business leaders can find themselves, you know, the old adage, the old truism is that it's tough at the top, right?
Lonely at the top.
Right, lonely at the top. And sometimes you can find, we witness it a bit now with remote working, that people can find themselves feeling fully isolated if they're not seeing anyone all week. They feel removed, they feel disconnected. And so if someone in that situation is told, be more resilient, it's like your access points to that are not obvious. And once you know, I read something that reiterated my belief on this a couple of months ago. And the author said, the opposite of resilience is loneliness. And I think that's not always the juxtaposition we think. But the moment you see the antonym to it, the moment you see that the opposite of resilience is loneliness, then connectedness suddenly becomes more vital to you. And actually, stringing the bits together, why were the army soldiers so high performing when they were in service and so despondent and struggling when they were separated from their tribe? It's because the opposite of resilience is loneliness. The moment they were disconnected from people who understood them, who could see what their lived experience was. And so, look, why is it relevant for business leaders? Because connectedness is vital, both for them to feel connected to people in the same boat. Have they got someone to bounce their challenges off against? But in addition, if they're trying to build resilient teams, then knowing that building a connected team is a really important part of that. So I think, you know, the objective really of breaking it down into those 3 bite-sized chunks is, while anything like that is a bit reductive, actually just helps you access, it makes the term accessible. So, you know, if you're finding I'm not feeling very resilient, your first action might be then, well, have a chatted to anyone, have a connected with anyone. What's my friendship situation like? And I think, you know, trying to break those things down. So that's what we did with the teams. We're like, how could you build connectedness in your team? How could you build connectedness yourself? What's your network like? It's why events like that are fabulous, because you might get 2 or 3 new connections where you're like, actually, I'll put in a coffee with that person. And just trying to feel like you're plugged into a network, I think is quite important.
I think that's often when I speak to the companies there, the most valuable thing they find of it is the kind of like peer-to-peer network, partly because you're right, it is tough. And these are companies that are sort of, you know, growing fast. They've taken money, and that's an indication of things going well. But it also, one of the other things that we've discussed with guests on the podcast is that does mean that, you know, that they have different roles. And, you know, often entrepreneurs will think, if things aren't quite growing as quickly, oh, well, I just need to work harder, etc. And actually, that's not always necessarily the case. That's the sort of the joint. But it's thinking a bit more about those things that you outline there as well. I think we've also done a survey of the group, and it's quite interesting on hybrid work, because I think this has just been another kind of like factor that's just made kind of running a business harder now. Or not harder, it's just like it's more stuff to take into account. And I know that's one of your kind of like big things, is that the modern world just like is a lot, in some ways is a lot easier to organise via all the various kind of messaging apps and so on, but actually just that stream of communication makes it more difficult as well. And I thought it was quite interesting to break down the numbers of what people were saying about hybrid work. So just 1 in 5 of let me get this right, sorry. 1 in 20 of the companies expect their employees in 5 days a week. 9 in 20, so the highest one by far, expect people in between 3 and 4 days a week. And then 1 in 5 let employees choose at their own discretion, which I was a bit surprised that it was quite that high. And I also wondered if it was a bit like the take as much annual leave as you want, like actually having some guidelines for people around when they should be in the office is quite helpful. I don't know, what did you make of the statistics when you sort of looked at
Look, the critical thing really is employers trying to choose what their position is. Right. So all of those positions are defendable.
Yes.
But all of those positions will end up with a slightly different profile of employees.
Yeah.
So if you want 5 days in the office, typically what you get people who can afford to live near the office. That's self-selecting to some extent. In London, Spare Room, the website to find a place to live, Spare Room say there isn't a single postcode in London that is affordable on a graduate salary. Right. So immediately you're saying, okay, so it's either someone who lives with their parents in London, so they're living in that, or they can live nearby. But that's going to have an impact, whether you recognise it or not, on the profile of your employees. In addition, broadly, 5 days a week, you're going to push out people who've got care responsibilities. Now, it might be care responsibilities to a dog, it might be care responsibilities to a parent, or it could be child care responsibilities. But those people broadly have found themselves thinking, life represents such a balance that I can get my life into a bit more of an equilibrium if I'm only in the office 3 days or 2 days. Right.
Yeah.
So look, each of those decisions. So you could well say, okay, here's what we know. We know that our culture is faster moving, more energized, more connected when we're in the office 5 days a week. It's a perfectly defendable position. What you might find, though, is that the profile of the people you hire is not as diverse as you want, and that you possibly have to pay a bit more. The evidence suggests that we see a bit of flexibility is worth about 10 to 15% pay. So you're going to have to pay a bit more, and you might not have the diversity that you wanted. Right, fully defendable, though, if you're convinced that it will make your business more effective. Right.
Yeah.
Then, on the other hand, there are some businesses that say, actually, the people we're after are slightly less symmetrical. They're less ordered. A lot of developers love working late at night. Right. Big deal for them.
Yeah.
Don't tell them to be in the office at 9 o'clock, but they'll happily keep working till midnight. Right. For them, going to the office was never going to be the big pull, but it might be. Look, if you're setting up an app, a web project, something that needs developers, you might realise, okay, there's a bit of a trade-off. Me demanding that people are in the office 4 days a week, 3 days a week from 9 till 6 actually means I'm not getting the best developers that my budget would allow. But if I give a bit of flex and say, okay, I've got to be in the office for a couple of days for team dynamic reasons, but I'm going to let them work from wherever they want because my budget's getting me a slightly better quality of coder than I would have got otherwise. And so, look, all of those things, the critical thing is all of them are decisions, but I think you need to be trying to make decisions and understand why you're making the decision. If you're making the decision because you spent quite a lot of money on an expensive office and so it's a sunk cost and so I want people there, then it's worth checking, am I getting organisational health from this? What you typically see is that people who work in big organisations, there's almost like a tax for bureaucracy. The more bureaucratic, the bigger your organisation is, the more people have to be in the office because they're spending a lot of time on Teams calls. They're not actually interacting with each other when they're in the office. And what you're starting to get, really interesting, for the first time, really, to any extent in business history, is you're starting to get employee insubordination, right? So you're starting to get, there's probably a sort of prickly word for it, but you're starting to get employees not doing what their employers want of them.
Yeah.
They're not going into the office. They're told they've got to be in 3 days a week. They work at a big bank. They've gone in 3 days. No one noticed them on Tuesday. And so they start wrestling with, it cost me 30 quid to get in.
Yeah.
And my dog was a bit unhappy. You know what? I'm gonna go in a couple of days a week, but I'm not going to go in 3 days. No, it's really interesting from a philosophical point of view. What does it do to the employee-employer relationship when you've got people openly thinking, my employer doesn't know what's right for the business?
Yeah.
So, look, all of these things are good. I think all of them are defendable, but I think you probably should reach a decision rather than allow your own gut instinct to guide you into what the right thing to do is.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. On the communication side as well, right? Like, what is the research that you've read about the best way to be communicating, in 2025 and beyond now, right? Like, what are they? How should companies be approaching that? Because there are just so many sort of different ways, and it can end up creating more work, right? I have a story from Downing Street of AI creating more work, right? Where I came out of a meeting and I thought to myself, that was a really interesting piece of information. We should look at that and get some more things. So I tapped out a quick email to 2 people on it, and it was like, do you want to include X, Y, Z? And I was like, oh, yeah, probably will do actually. Like, yeah, not bad idea for them to see this. Went into another meeting, came out an hour later, and there was just this email thread of like 50 people and all these sort of bowling balls going down Whitehall of all this kind of like now work and what had been created. I was like, oh my gosh, it was just supposed to be kind of like a quick note. And to me, it was a great example of where like technology sort of creates more kind of work. What's your advice for how companies should think about communication?
Yeah. So Microsoft say that 57% of our job now is communicating about work rather than doing work. And to be honest, I frequently say to people, how many hours a week do you spend in meetings? And the bigger the company, the bigger the number. Yeah. But it's not uncommon to hear 20, 25 hours a week. I did one session with one organisation about this time last year. I asked them, everyone in the meeting, in the room I was in, said they spent 40 hours a week in the meetings. They spent the whole week in the meetings, and some of them were doing meetings in the evening with international offices. That's it. Unbelievable. So it begs the question, well, what do you think those meetings are accomplishing? Because presumably everyone is demonstrating continuous partial attention. They're not really paying attention in those meetings. They're just in the meetings while they're doing their emails. So what's the value of any of that? People, basically, meetings have become like the background TV that you watch while you're doing your work. And if you sort of boil it down to that, you start thinking, there's a phrase, there's a Cory Doctorow published an article a couple of years ago where he talked about the enshittification of web products. And what he means by that is that it used to be when you went to Google, you'd search something, the first link magically took you to the page you wanted. Yeah. And it might be something from your memory. I remember a TV show, it was about a dog, and right, you search it, boom, the first result, it was like magic. Now, Google doesn't do that anymore. It has a couple of pages of advertising links. The first link when you get to it probably doesn't take you to where you wanted, but takes you to like a content farm site that's trying to misdirect you. And so Cory Doctorow called that the enshittification of Google. Amazon's the same. You search for something very specific, all you'll mainly see are adverts targeting you. And work has gone through an enshittification where we turn up, we have back-to-back meetings all day. If you use Teams or Slack, you've always got messages that need answering and they feel quite urgent. Yeah. So you go and answer those messages immediately. And by the time you've answered the second one, the first one's replied to you again. So you're just playing whack-a-mole. And we've removed ourselves so far from actually what our jobs are. I remember hiring someone when I worked at Twitter. I hired someone because the marketing team were really struggling. I hired an extra person, got the budget before it did it. And I chatted to her 2 months into a job. How are you getting on? And she said, I'll be honest with you. All the meetings I go to and all the emails I get, I haven't had time to do my actual job because it's so overwhelming, the training I'm doing. I thought, wow, that is the lived reality of so many people's job, that they don't have the time to do the thing they were employed for more than 3 or 4 hours a week because everything else is pulling them down. Now, the question then becomes, can you redesign for that? And it comes from leaders. Leaders have to say, okay, we're not just going to allow everyone to create endless meetings. We're not just going to allow the solution to everything we do to be, let's have a meeting about it. Yeah. But it needs rewiring your culture. And so that's what I'll do with organizations. Like, can we rewire our instinctive responses to challenges from being, we need a meeting about this, to, okay, is there a different way for us to solve this problem? Broadly, if you start thinking about how to reduce the amount of meetings, aside from like recoding your whole corporate DNA, but you reduce the length of meetings, you reduce the frequency of meetings, or you reduce the attendee list of meetings. Yeah. And the third one, triggers our amygdala, right? It triggers our fear response, because if you're sitting on a table of 12 people and 11 of them stand up and go to a meeting, your first instinct is to think, why aren't I going?
Yeah.
And quite often people are like, I think I'll just go along to this. I'll just attend it.
Fear of missing out.
That's right. Fear of missing out is so visceral inside us. Now, there's a new way of reducing the amount of time you spend in meetings, these using AI summaries. So what some organisations have done is say, okay, we're going to reduce the attendees to 4 people, but everyone afterwards will get a summary of what took place. Actually, maybe even a video recording of what took place, and saying, look, for corporate health and decision making, anyone can see what's going on, but we're going to have far fewer people there. And hopefully, good meetings generally have a balance of different people talking. So we're going to try and have something that looks like a healthy meeting. So there are ways to do it, but you just got to bake it in from the start.
What can you give some advice on companies that are growing quickly, right? You talked at the beginning about joining Twitter when it's sort of 400 people and it's sort of 10xing in your time there in terms of employees. Like, what are the things looking back that you wish were different, that you'd done earlier, etc.? Because a lot of these companies are hopefully going to go maybe not quite on that sort of that rocket ship journey, but we'll certainly be hoping to kind of add people, and we'll be adding, we'll probably be trying to fight bureaucracy, but perhaps not doing a good job of it as well. So it'd be great to hear your reflections on that period.
Yeah, look, I think most people want to feel proud of the work they do. They want to feel like it's a good representation of them. They want to feel like, we do good stuff here and I contribute to that. I think people do want, I mentioned the sense of control, but they do want a sense of agency over what they're getting done. It's really interesting. If you look into sort of national labour force surveys, about 85% of people say my work is mainly done in a team and I have no impact over what my team does. So most of us feel like we go to work, we sort of listen along to things, we maybe reply to a few emails, but we don't necessarily have a big impact on what we do. If you can give people a sense of impact, that they are happy with what they're doing, it's a real big motivator for them. And the big question always becomes, amongst, you witness it quite often with small teams, that quite often culture's a big differentiator. Like a small team, they'll often say, it's what we used to say at Twitter. We used to say, we are 1/10 the size of Facebook, we're 100th the size of Google, but we know our goal is that if someone has a meeting with a Twitter person, it's their favourite meeting of the week. Okay, that was a simple goal.
Yeah.
Right, favourite meeting of the week. Right, so then you deconstruct it. What does favourite meeting of the week look like? Okay, so we were trying to take something funny that's happened on Twitter that week.
Yeah.
So we open with, did you see these funny tweets yesterday? Right, people are like, wow, this is so fresh. So you set the team up so that there was someone who circulated at the end of the day every day or twice a week, here are some funny tweets from the last couple of days. So
back when funny things used to
happen. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. The world has changed. But, so if there'd been FA Cup matches over the weekend or something funny had happened on Strictly, there were 2 funny tweets that anyone could use. So it looked like, wow, these people are at the cutting edge of freshness, right? The presentations look beautiful. We always used the best, the most up-to-date data in them. So all of these things, for me, were like, we printed it on, to use a metaphor, our presentation was printed on glossier paper than everyone else's. So if they were seeing a presentation from Google, they were seeing a presentation from Facebook, they were seeing a presentation from Twitter, they go, this one was really funny, it was really relevant to what I was doing, and man, those slides look beautiful. Right. Yeah. And so all of those things just contributed really gently to a sense of, I want to do business with Twitter. Now, sometimes this is you're going to pitch to a football team because you want them to include Twitter on their branding. Really good for us. Or it might be a politician. You want them to, they're not currently using Twitter, but you want them to value it. Or it might be an advertiser or, a gallery, an institution. Like all the time, you wanted people to think like, yeah, Instagram's bigger, Facebook's bigger, but Twitter's better. And so all of those things, all the time, we felt were really part. I guess it's an illustration that quite often your brand can be adjacent to your culture and
Yeah.
can play a sort of a really symbiotic part. But we're obsessed all the time with, we loved people that were quite quirky because they were quite memorable.
Yeah.
If you get the best out of quirky people, it will be someone's favourite meeting of the week.
Yeah.
You know, if you you'll know this from your time. That, like, quite often it's not always the most intelligent person or the slickest person, but you know, if they can be memorable, if there's something about them, so we were happy with that. We'd give them the assets to make them look good. But I think when you are trying to establish success, getting some of these core things, what our culture is a really critical part. What our brand is a really critical part. And so things come from that. So quite often, you know, I've spent a lot of time asking people about their culture. But when people say our culture is really important, the first question that should come from that is, talk to me about your recruitment process that gets those culturally aligned people. And generally what people say is they describe a recruitment process that has no element of culture to it. Okay, so what they're saying to me then is, oh yeah, I love getting on with people. You know, you often used to hear something which is a sort of become a hackneyed phrase, but we work hard, play hard here.
Yeah.
But what that effectively means is, look, we work hard and we go to the pub after.
Yeah.
But there was nothing that was culturally significant about other than the fact that you can go to the pub with a lot of people and get on with them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, okay, we hire creative people who've made something happen themselves. You know, so that might be you hire someone because they've done an art project that got off the ground, or they've done a creative project that got off. Right, that's quite a big signifier of what sort of person you're getting. But you've got to look for that and you've got to hire for that. So, look, the thing I would say, especially with startups, with scale-ups, doing more than paying lip service to your culture often has a disproportionate benefit, especially in retention, because people end up thinking, I want to stay here, because, you know, any of us who've done more than one job, 2 or 3 jobs, you know that culture doesn't always come as a given in terms of where you end up.
When you sort of, what were your sort of lessons on recruiting? Because that is another thing that a lot of these companies have to go through, right? Is like when you start out, you're sort of like, you can't hire people from, and kind of like immediate networks, etc. When you do begin to scale, you have to widen that net, etc. You have to look in different places. You have to hire for roles that you might not have ever anticipated for. Like, what were your sort of learnings of going about that? Or was Twitter such a strong employer brand that it didn't sort of...
No, not necessarily. What you find, I worked previously at Google, and what you find with Google is that there's this corporate inertia hiring people. With Google, it's not uncommon to have 9 interviews. Yeah. And what happens by the time you get to like the 8th or 9th interview is that no one's necessarily enthusiastic about the candidate, but no one wants to be the person who spikes them. No one wants to be the person who says no. And so what you often get is just like this ongoing sort of Mobius strip of recruiting, where the recruiter will say, we're just going to arrange 2 more interviews. And candidates will say, I don't understand this. I've been in the process now for 5 months, 6 months. I don't understand. Is there a job? Isn't there a job? No one seems, the people who are interviewing me don't seem that. So our objective with Twitter was to be the opposite of that. Could we make decisions quickly? Could we demonstrate to people that the candidate was important to us? One of the things we wanted is we didn't just want to hire, not everyone's on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so we didn't just want to hire Twitter superfans, because if you're going to be persuasive for the people who aren't on it, then to some extent you need to understand the people who aren't on it.
Yeah.
So sometimes the best people we hired were the people who are like, oh yeah, I never used it, but now I get it. Right. Articulate for us what you got. What was the penny drop moment for you? Because that's going to be helpful for converting other people. But the more you can... Look, most interviewing is compromise far more than we acknowledge, right? You start off with this idealized version of what a candidate looks like, and 3 months down the line, you're like, I need to fill that seat. I need to get someone in that seat. But the more specific you can be at the outset, the more you can try and define what you're looking for to a candidate, the better. The famous example of that is Netflix. When Netflix, sort of almost 20 years ago now, but when Netflix published their culture document, half their candidates halved overnight.
Yeah.
And it's because they said, if you're doing a B grade job here, we're going to fire you. And we're going to pay you money to leave is the way they said it. And if you're an A grade candidate, but you have a B grade quarter, we're going to pay you to leave. It's really brutal. And what they wanted to do was articulate, we are an edgy place to work. You cannot be comfortable here. But it worked. People were like, okay, I may not build a decade-long career there, but what I will do is I get some really transferable experience in a 2 years tour of duty. So, I think the more you can be very clear about what you're bringing people into and be selective based on that, it seems to have longevity to it, really.
When you were at Twitter and you were going through such exponential growth, was there a time when you ever just thought, we've got too much growth here, like this is getting out of control? And if so, how did you handle it?
It's an interesting challenge of the tech sector because these certain iconic brands that grow like rocket ships, Google is maybe the most cash generative business idea in history, to the extent that it's kind of paid for a lot of mediocre products that have followed, right?
Yeah.
Google hasn't made a lot of money out of a lot of its other endeavors, and probably was the only business in the world when they bought YouTube that could have afforded it.
Yeah.
So to afford it to run it, let alone the cost of buying it. So they grew really fast. Facebook grew really fast. Instagram. What you find is the rest of the tech sector is scrambling to keep up. So the strange thing is that obsession, that need to post growth, becomes quite a toxic force inside organisations. So in somewhere like Twitter, we might scrap to get to 30% year-on-year growth, maybe 40%. For most businesses, that's off the chart amazing. But in the tech sector, 30% or 20%, if you're hitting 30, 20 looks likely some month of the quarter. That would have everyone downgrading your stock, everyone saying that they should be divesting from you. And so you're in constant existential panic about, are we growing quick enough? Are we meeting investors' expectations? And so, look, Patrick Pichette, former CFO of Google, said, revenue solves all known problems. And it's completely true. Mm-hmm. When I've worked at Google and their revenue was up 50%, sometimes in 15 years into the company's history, no one is doing analysis of what went wrong. No one is spending time looking at non-spending clients. They're just packing the money into suitcases and away you go. When you're not growing at those levels, you often find yourself in a constant state of crisis. So it's a really interesting challenge. You've got investors who are expecting a certain amount of return. You've got analysts expecting a certain amount of return. So I would characterize 8 very happy years at Twitter, but there was never a moment where you were resting on your laurels thinking we're doing well. I remember turning up at one conference and some guy tweeted, next up, European boss of Twitter, the easiest job in the world. and I remember going back to the office going, man, this guy doesn't know the half of it. We were grafting, to try and to just about get over the expectations of what we had. So, a little bit more complex than that, really.
I think a lot of businesses are like that, right? Like from the outside, they look like they're absolutely sort of crushing it or whatever, but inside it's like it's a constant sort of fight for the next thing.
I've got mates who work at TikTok, who've worked at Instagram, who've worked at and from the outside you go, man, it must be a great job right now, and they're like, you don't know the half of it. In case of TikTok, Chinese owners, really high expectations. People have got a clear idea of where they think that business is going to get to, and to get there, it requires you way exceeding people's expectations. And if you're going to exceed expectations, well, it's a lot harder than you imagine.
That's a really useful insight and great to finish with. Bruce, thanks very much for coming on the Good Growth Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Good Growth Podcast. If you enjoyed that, make sure to hit subscribe so you're the first to hear about new episodes. And always stay up to date on the latest growth insights.